Pete, the first chapter of your book, Transitions, A Director's Journey and Motivational Handbook, starts with how to quit. So what is this and why is that important to start the book?
So, one of the things that I wanted to keep in mind with the book was that I don't want to be prescriptive in saying this is the way you have to do it. And I also didn't want to be overwhelming to the reader in the sense of like, you got to figure out, you've got to know what you want to do. Every, nook and cranny of your career needs to be decided, and then just attack it. Because I know that it can take people various amounts of time to figure out what their voice might be, what their sensibility might be, what their appetite for whatever different position you might seek in the industry requires of you. And so I wanted to, in the beginning, speak about curiosity and how much of a benefit or a plus it is to have that. Because if you're not curious, I think you start to become a little too cemented in what you think works and does not work, and it's constantly evolving. And en route to figuring out what you want to do specifically, you're gonna have to quit. And so I wanted to hopefully present that to the reader in a way that it's not a derogatory word to quit. In fact, when you choose to quit, it's an empowering thing. So if you are walking down a road of, let's say you're editing and you're like, editing's not for me, and you pivot from editing to writing or editing to producing, that quitting can be a positive thing. So it's kind of my opportunity to rebrand the energy around the word quitting.
And is there quitting with finesse and quitting with burning your bridges?
That's a great question. I think that you can definitely quit with finesse. I think when it's clear what your goals are, then, I think I maybe found the right word or another word for it, which is a pivot. I think quitting can be just a pivot. But I also think you can end up burning bridges if you do it, if you don't dismount gracefully. You know what I mean? So I think the idea is to not burn any bridges because you never know when you're going to run into people again. And I think a lot of what we do in the industry is built upon relationships. So burning them down is probably not going to be in your favor. But sometimes that can be hard not to.
Right, because I'm thinking if let's suppose there's personality differences, but it's better to, as I like how you say it, dismount gracefully, that might be difficult. And especially if there's an ego at the top. And so egos at the top tend to know each other and could make phone calls. So yeah, just how you dismount and making sure no one's pride is hurt, that's a difficult thing in any industry, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is. I feel like, another thing that I've come to try and add to my process is like certain relationships are going to be, and by I'm speaking more specifically to like positions on a crew are going to be contentious by virtue of the fact of what each position is empowered to do, right? So like an easy example is like a cinematographer wants more equipment to beautifully capture the show, and a producer is wanting to get the best look for the least amount of money. And so if these two parties know that, then they can already accept that it's going to be a lot of no's and a lot of why's and a lot of seemingly contentious exchanges. But if you know it's going to be like that, you can get past that and kind of just have the conversation you need to, or maybe find a way to embrace it with humor, because we're all just doing what hopefully, we're all just doing what the job requires of us. Like if I want another take at a scene, hopefully the actors know that I'm not doing it, for any reason other than I'm trying to get the best out of this moment, But then on the flip, if an actor feels like they don't have another take to give and they think that we've got it, and it seems like they're really not willing to do another one, what I have to make a decision on my end too. And so it's always this kind of frequent navigation of the interpersonal dynamics that you have to find finesse in.
And I think maybe as people get older, they realize, okay, I need to do the 2 weeks notice or even a month, or, have the talk and let them know, I'm going to be leaving. But I think when we're younger, and I'm speaking from my own experience, there are times when you just go, okay, cool, it's lunchtime, I won't be coming back. And you think that, okay, I'm 21, it's not going to matter.
Right.
But maybe just, don't take that interning job. It's not something I probably could have taken at that age, but if you can't, stay with it,
And a lot of times the jobs we come across that we don't enjoy, oftentimes like there are periods of time, right? Like it might be a 3-month commitment, or it's the duration of this film. Sometimes it's, can you get through it? Is there anything else you can learn outside of, the thing that you'd rather not be dealing with? Can you learn the inner workings of how a film is produced while being in that office that has a few people that aren't your type of people? You know what I mean? Like, can you find the value to take away from it? A lot of times it's reconfiguring your perspective to get something guaranteed to propel you forward.
Right. And did anyone question you about that chapter, or did people praise you like, wow, that's great. That's a great way to start a book about having a film.
I think there's a sense of relief, and I hope there's a sense of relief, for people who read it and they're like, okay, yeah, that's, I'm not about to read a book that's going to tell me, here's what you need to do and blah, 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 blah. It's going to help me help me develop some tools through which to employ as I move toward finding my path. So the response has been great.
I think it sets the tone that it's going to be more reality-based rather than, just, I don't know, all these cliches that you hear for years, but that that, okay, stuff is temporary and, it may not always be a fit, and that's okay, and you may not be able to fix it.
Right. Right.
So, do you think that there's a time limit on how long to stay with a job? Now, I realize it's different because TV directing and
right.
it's short-term projects usually, but.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I guess, so is there a time limit for how long to stay with a job? I feel like a lot of what happens I'm going to take film and TV and try and marry, the types of jobs that people have. A lot of times they're freelance driven, or they're kind of periodic. So they kind of have their own time limits where, if you're editing a film, it's, I don't know why I keep using editing, but if you're editing a film, it's 12 to 18 weeks of your life, and then you can move to the next one. TV show, 9 months, maybe fewer. If you're a producer, that project may never go, or it may be a small window in time, and then maybe you didn't have a good time on it, but they make a sequel and you back out of it, because you want to have whatever peace of mind you're looking for. So I feel like we have a unique opportunity in this creative space to not be married to anything too long. So you can find a way to withdraw or not continue without having to quit. But, if and when that situation arises, it's really measuring what's the real benefit. I mean, I will say, if there's questions of like mental health, if there's questions of like, it's just an improper situation, then by all means, like, talk to the proper people and withdraw yourself from anything that's, not good for you. But, I think being too ideal about how the work experience should be can also leave one, missing out from the benefits that they could take from a particular job. Because I can tell you, like, if I go through the jobs that I've had over, my career, not many of them were awesome, but you know what I mean? But they're like, I can always go back and say, oh, I learned that thing from that job. And then who knew that 4 years later, I'd be able to take that thing and turn it into something that powered what I was doing. One of my first jobs out of college was, working for a company that would kind of soon be overtaken by IMDb. But this was a company that you had to pay for the information that is available for free now. And I had to call, I'd read the trades, Hollywood Reporter, Variety. I'd look at the film markets, MeFed, American Film Market, whatever it was. And I would then call and say, oh, it says that you bought the rights to this book. Is it true? Are you making this movie? What status is it in? When might you begin shooting it? Whatever. And I hated that job, because I probably made 50 to 100 phone calls a day. But when it came time 5 years later to raise money for my film, my feature, I built a muscle up of like, I can talk to anybody, because it's just a conversation. Until they tell me, no, I don't want to invest in your project, I have no problem following up. Because that's, just kind of this thing that it was the byproduct of what I had done begrudgingly for 2 years.
That's fascinating. Was that the book that was in Blockbuster?
It was called Baseline Studio Systems, and I don't know. I think it was all. I imagine they probably had some physical resource that you got. But I believe it existed online, and then you just subscribed to it and got whatever you got. But that's how I dealt with one little process of it. I don't even know what people got on the other end of their payment.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. So then you'd had people hang up, and you'd already sort of been, that the hazing of any telemarketer, you probably already
It's
got
like,
that.
oh, okay, that's gonna happen. Fine. You don't, because and then on the flip, there would be people who would be like, I'm calling for my 900th attempt to update this record because after X amount of time, we're gonna check to see, like, should we make this a dead record or is it active? And so you're calling people and it's like the production company somewhere in North Carolina and it's the same guy you've called 8 times and it's like, hey, how you been? And they're telling you a little bit more about the trials and tribulations of making the film, and you're building these relationships in a weird way.
That's fascinating. Wow. And so that must have really helped, I'm sure. Yeah, then you're not scared.
Yeah.
Up that phone. And just wrapping up, so it sounds like with most jobs, if I were an HR manager and I looked at a resume with all these different projects, I'd be like, oh wow, you've jumped around a bit. Mm-hmm. But in the film industry, it sounds like that's a plus.
Yeah, I imagine so. I've been very kind of tunnel driven with my career pursuits, but I do know, like, friends that I've had in advertising, again, the commercial world, it was shared with me that it was almost looked bad if you stayed somewhere longer than 2 to 3 years, because then I guess what they were saying is that it looks like you're stagnant, or it looks like, you're not seeking to try new ideas and communicate in a different way, or you're not well sought after, So there's all these each industry kind of has its own take on the activity of a resume.
Pete, I understand the first movie that you wrote and directed got into Sundance?
Yeah, so, I guess it's the first one that I put out to film festivals. It's a short film I did called 3D. It was my senior thesis film coming out of NYU Film School, so it's kind of like, if you were an undergraduate film and you were like crazy enough to say, I'm a director, like this was the path. And so did a 24-minute short film that I wrote, produced, directed. Had to raise $24,000 to make this film. It was a different time because we had to shoot on film. So everything was, I mean, people who have never shot on film have no, have no budgetary appreciation for what that meant. And the example I often use is that we had to do an answer print. So, you know, like when you used to develop film photographs, you'd develop and then you get the negative back in the little pouch with the photos, right? And you could continue to develop that negative again and again if you needed to. And so that's how we were making films. We had the negative, but we had a work print. And so we would cut the work print, but save the negative. And then when the work print was finished, we'd cut, well, not us, there'd be a negative cutter with white gloves and glue who would cut the actual negative that ran through the camera and then cement it back together to match the locked picture from the work print. And then that cemented negative that had run through the camera, all the film that had run through the camera, now cemented together in the, you know, configuration of the film. That's the print from which that's the film from which the prints get made. And so anyhow, that cost $4,000 for the negative cut. And now I've made shorts for that amount of money, you know? And so anyhow, that film starred Dorian Missick, who was an actor I had met during my NYU days, and it's gone on to be in 4 or 5 of my projects. Starred Kerry Washington right at the beginning of her career, fresh out of George Washington. She was graduating the same year I did. Al Thompson, myself, and it went to Sundance and about 30 festivals around the world.
And so did you actually think that you could get into Sundance? I mean, were you thinking it's a wild card?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the thing. I think over time, it's nice to know, for me, it was nice to know that there were these potential outlets for a project, but I never did the projects for those outlets. So it was always enough for me to finish something. That was kind of the point. Now, that's not removing the reality that I am aware that these outlets exist, but it's like this kind of filmmaker Zen balancing act of like, if I put all my weight on acknowledgement from some outside group, then if I don't get that, well, what is that going to do for me emotionally on this end? You know, will I feel like I failed? Will I feel frustrated? Will I become embittered? You know, so I didn't expect it. I knew it could happen. And when it did happen, I felt like I had achieved something that was pretty difficult. And so I was very happy about that. But that's been the journey of the whole career. Like, how do you navigate what you want from what's achievable and what can you guarantee about this work that you do, so you don't, you know, find yourself becoming one of those people who are just angry at how the industry has not recognized them for what they think is great work.
What was the submission fee at that time?
Oh boy. You know what? I have a pretty good memory. It was probably like $45, and it was probably like, you know, 45 I didn't have, you know, but that was always part of your budgeting too. Like, how much are we going to put aside for film festival submissions? But it was either $35 or $45. I'm pretty sure.
And so no Kickstarter, no Seed and Spark, no Indiegogo at that time?
No.
And how did you raise that? You said $24,000?
$24,000. So I raised a portion from someone I had interned with. I raised a portion from my mom, a small portion. I raised a portion from just knocking on doors and, you know, hey, remember you put those braces on me, you know? well, you look like you might have a little bit of, money. So it was kind of by hook or crook. I worked, and it took a long time to put it all together. The film kind of sat around for a while until post-production money could be raised.
Did you go to Sundance with the film?
I did, yeah.
You did? Okay. So when you packed up to leave Sundance, what was your mindset thinking like, okay, now things are really going to change for me?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, that's the thing, right? You kind of get into this place where you like almost everything I've said to you, I could then, shake the Etch-a-Sketch and erase it all, because you try and temper yourself with this, healthy view of expectations. And then you get into the thing and you're like, okay, maybe this is it now. And so, yeah, I think at that time I was definitely hopeful and expectant of certain things to come out of it, because I had watched other people have a particular kind of journey after going to Sundance.
And then you got back home, and so you're in New York City or New Jersey?
In New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what happened?
So get back home, I get a phone call from Lynn Auerbach, who worked at the Sundance Institute. She was interested in seeing if I had a feature or anything, like what was my next project. Luckily, I did. And so I passed that feature script on to her. I had been very strategic because I try and temper creativity with being very deliberate. And so I watched a lot of filmmaking friends before me go to Sundance, get a similar call, and not have the next project. And, they say, oh, we'll reach out when, you finish that script. But like, if you take 8 months to reach out, well, the likelihood that they've reached out to a new batch of people who had a, great film at another film festival is high. And I think you just want to, when that doorbell rings, you want to answer the door, as far as I'm concerned. And so I got her that script. It wasn't really, ready or perfect in any way, but it had fade in and fade out and about 113 pages in between. And so she read it. She was like, well, I don't think this is gonna be the one, but get me another draft. And that was all I needed. So we did that dance for maybe a year and a half before they were like, well, look, we're not going to select the film, but we'll introduce you to a bunch of producers in LA and set you up with meetings. And so that was kind of the evolution of that.
What did that experience teach you?
So the experience of going to Sundance and then coming home and then the phone not ringing, like off the hook. Well, in the book, I talk about after that screening at NYU's Film Festival, and again, taking a lot of that expectation of certain acknowledgement that I had at Sundance and bringing it back home to the university. We had a film festival that was designed to screen all the work of all the students that finished the project. And so they would have a craft award, and they would have like a Wasserman finalist, so top 3 undergrad films, top 3 grad films. And the film didn't get recognized in any way whatsoever in any of the categories. And it had been advertised though as, a film to see, or look at how well our slate of films is doing. Here are these 6 films from this year that went to Sundance, including, 3D, et cetera, et cetera. And so after the awards kind of came and went, I had a meeting with the dean at the time, or the chair rather. And I was like, well, look, how does this happen? It's kind of crazy to me. This is righteous, indignant me at 22 years old. It's kind of crazy to me that you're using the film to promote the festival and how well, the work is in the festival, but then with these awards, it's like crickets or whatever. And he explained to me that, well, in the past, we've had a film win Sundance and come back and not be acknowledged in the way we're talking about. So I was like, all right, touche. I didn't win, I get it. And my takeaway from all of that was I can either be upset about this, which it's clearly becoming evident that I'd be standing on very unfirm ground with this anger. What I'm taking away from this is that I never took the opportunity to build a network of people who were aware of me, as, a student to watch or someone that they had a more personal relationship with. And so coming out of that, both Sundance and then the NYU Film Festival, I was pretty committed to never having that happen again. And so building a community of folks who would be aware of me and know my story and be clear on where I wanted to go with my career. And that's how I, built my production company, rinse, repeat. I think that's how I got into television directing, which was not just like I decided to do it and it happened. It was very deliberate and took a lot of time and a lot of relationship building. And so much like the phone call job, there was this great takeaway from those two film festival experiences that I think I'm not where I am today had I not gone through them.
And so did you actually go on meetings? Did you fly out to LA?
Oh yeah.
During that time you did?
I went out to NYU. I went out to LA in June of 2002. And I had, maybe 15 meetings set. And, I stumbled my way through these meetings. I did the best I could. Looking back, I probably was full of passion, but maybe didn't know how to run a good meeting, present myself in like meeting form. And, the takeaway from the trip was, well, it looks like the film is maybe a little too mainstream for what the Sundance Institute was looking to do. And then on the flip, it looks like it's a little too indie for what these more mainstream producers at the time in 2002 are looking to do. And let's just pause and say it's a vastly different landscape for content in 2002. It's like you had movies made at studios or mini majors, and then you had like 2 or 3 indies that fought through and made it out. It was not this kind of world where you see all these independent films and you could put them out on whatever platform you want, or you could make them for cheap enough that, you could self-distribute them through your website or something. And so, I brought that back and said, well, if it's not gonna work for either of these two demographics or buckets or whatever we want to call, then looks like I'm gonna have to raise some money on my own. And that became my focus after that trip.
And so not indie enough for Sundance. Mm-hmm. How does that happen?
Well, I think it changes with the times, like I think every festival slate, if you look at any festival year to year, there's kind of a theme that happens, just that kind of reflects the times. And I think in 2002, the premise and the execution of the film was not necessarily like leaning toward the types of character exploration that might have been more of the day, as far as like, this is what an indie film is going to do. And all of these things are like shifting terms, So that's another thing for like filmmakers to always remember, like these things can shift, they and blow in the wind. They change with the times. I mean, I've done TV shows where one year they say, we will never hire a first-time director, when I was trying to get my first jobs. And then 2 seasons later, people I know are getting their first ever episode of TV on the same show. And, things are free to change, but it's like just knowing like it's all so malleable. It's all so nothing is set in stone.
So do you think that if you had been the same age then, now, and gotten into Sundance, that it would be more difficult? Because you talked about building a network. Well, there was no social media
Right.
back then. Yeah, no MySpace even yet.
Right.
So
Yeah, it was nothing.
right.
Email was your social network.
There, right. AOL. Yeah, you've got mail.
Right.
So do you think it would be more difficult, or do you think it was actually easier then because there were less people trying to do it?
That's a great question. Do I think it was easier then? I would say it was not easier then. While it may have been more difficult it definitely was more difficult to make something. And now that means there are probably fewer things being made. But conversely, I think because the barriers to entry are lower now, and it's kind of there's been a democratization to like getting in the game. You've got fewer things being made in the past with poor execution. And then you've got more things being made now, but with people who have the opportunity to execute well, because it's not like their first thing ever. You know what I mean? And I remember when I saw like friends' brothers, like from my year of high school, like one friend's brother, I'm thinking specifically, was like in middle school and was doing like green screen stuff. You know what I mean? It's like, I hadn't even done it yet. I was like 24, I had never green screened anything yet. And this kid's in middle school, green screening stuff. So you take that and you just move along the timeline of like, now that person's 22 with a short film, that the possibility for that short film to be so much more well executed than what I was making, I think is high.
How many years was it between showing at Sundance and getting your first television directing job?
So I went to Sundance in January of 2001. I booked my first episode of television in April of 2017.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that would be 16 and a quarter years.
But you were active in film and television. You worked at NYU for a while.
Yeah, I mean, that whole time. So to everyone watching and listening, I never stopped being a filmmaker. And I think, that's part of what I try and touch on in the book. Like you have to define yourself. You have to claim what you are and who you are. And so while I worked a desk job at NYU, I was assistant production coordinator. I was signing forms for the students to go get film and, rent equipment, or here's a voucher to go to Kodak or whatever. I was the signature toward other younger folks' dreams. I answered a million questions at the window, because they would come to our window and get this information, and I would, give unsolicited advice, or it became sought after. People would kind of know that I had a real world skill that I could kind of impart and offer to them. I had my production company during this time. I had a podcast. I was making things. I won a competition at Tribeca for a heist screenplay that I co-wrote in 2008. I wrote a bunch of screenplays I thought I might sell that I never did. And so all of that time, I was still creating, I had a target on feature filmmaking, because that was what I had gotten into this game to do, and over time, this landscape was changing. It was the types of films that I was kind of interested in making were becoming obsolete, because everything was coming from some other intellectual property, like a comic book or an amusement park ride like Pirates of the Caribbean, you know, and like $20 million films, $10 million films were kind of disappearing. And what I was noticing was a lot of the people that I was inspired by that made those films were moving to TV, because that's where there was more, there was a higher need. They needed more content, and the filmmakers that were kind of sent to the wayside by the new mandate in features were going over to TV and saying, well, I'd love to tell that kind of story. And obviously all ushered in by Sopranos and the Golden Age, and watching these interesting characters find exploration episode after episode, season after season. And so I think from like 2009 until 2017, I had a pretty dedicated focus on trying to get into TV. But it took some time before I was able to kind of put it all together.
Did you ever feel this sort of common thing that someone took your chance? You know, I see it in our comments, and I can understand why people get angry. But did you ever feel that at times?
No, I never felt like someone took my chance. I was constantly trying to find the cocktail that would work for me to get the opportunity. And, you know, what was clear, and I'm a person who went through 4 director programs that the studios and the networks were compelled to put together because the hiring was so clearly angled in one direction. You know, I just felt like, well, how do I get access to the people, you know, who are making these decisions? I felt like that would be I knew that was the biggest hurdle. And so that hurdle was either making something that people could see and doing that as often as possible, to give myself as many shots as possible. And then also discovering these programs where you would get to learn how television was made and be included in these cohorts and these units that were selected to help bridge the gap between, you know, 93% of the directors being hired being white males and 7% encompassed everyone else. And so those pipelines were helpful in kind of meeting the folks, learning how TV was made, and then, you know, hopefully shining enough to get the opportunities.
Did anybody sit you down and say, Pete, I know you mean well, but like, why don't you, have you thought about going to law school?
No.
Bright guy, no?
Nobody ever sat me down or tried to send me in another direction. I feel like I always had people share, maybe not the strength of belief in me, but I feel like everybody in my world believed in me because it was clear that I was being very thoughtful about it. It wasn't like, you know, I didn't have like delusions of grandeur of like what it was going to take from me to get in the industry. I was informed on how it worked. When I met a roadblock, I tried to hop up to 10,000 feet and look at it and then say, well, what can I learn from this and how can I pivot? You know, which is kind of the whole like through line of the book. You know, it's like there's these, everybody's gonna have their own journey and their own story, but like you're gonna find opportunities in these challenges, and you have to challenge yourself to respond with your goal in mind and not with your emotion and not with your, you know, anything else.
Is this your quote right here, Pete?
Yeah, I said it. I'll take ownership. I know maybe someone else has said it somewhere in the world, but yeah, if you ride the wave long enough, the tide always turns.
And what does that mean?
To me, that just is, it means a lot of things. And it's funny, I have a lot of water metaphors. Like in the book, I talked about being a yacht, you know, in the road to getting your first job, you're like this luxury yacht that doesn't have a slip to dock. And you're trying to build enough awareness in the marina for people to offer you a slip so you can get off the boat and walk on land, you know? And then another one that I say often is, you know, sometimes when you're trying to make that transition, you're on two surfboards, but you can't ride them both at the same time. It's impossible. And the reality of that is you're going to have to choose which one you're going to get on. You can't ride them both. You're going to have to pick one and step off of one in order to get to where you're going. And so, you know, this quote, if you ride the wave long enough, the tide always turns, is speaking to the idea of, you know, for those of you who are trying and have been trying to go after a singular goal, I can't remove being self-aware. You know, I can't remove being, you know, being smart about the business and being open to feedback. But if you take those three things and include that as kind of the back end of this quote, I think that over a long enough timeline, with those three things powering you, you'll find your opportunities.
Can it mean, though, that there can also be a reversal of fortune?
Yeah, I think exactly. There can definitely be a reversal. You can, you know, if you're seeing, you know, hit after hit after hit, or, you know, everybody loves everything you do every time that you release it or you do it, it's probably going to come a time where it's not going to be as well received. And then at that point, you know, I think then it just flips to the other side and then you figure out how to get out of that situation. But, you know, what do they say? Even a broken clock is right 2 times a day. You know, like it's just, I've found over my journey that having things that remind me of, it's not destiny, or it's not predetermined, or it's not like, you know, I'm not in some kind of, I can't think of the word I'm looking for. I'm not in some kind of like career purgatory. You know what I mean? Like there's ways to navigate the downtimes. And most of it's going to be about having a positive attitude.
If you had gotten into TV directing right out of Sundance, do you think you'd still be directing today?
No, I don't. I think if I got into television directing right out of Sundance, I would have made too many mistakes to build a career. I think that the first thing being TV and film are two different, they're two different mediums, clearly, but making a film, whether you subscribe to the auteur theory or not, like it's the director's medium and television is the writer's medium. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to fare well. And I think that over the 17 years that we've, you know, identified between Sundance and first job, you know, I did a lot of branded content. I did some commercial work where I learned that the product, it's the product's medium. You know what I mean? It's the agency's medium and the brand's medium. And learning that was something that I could take to television and understand, like, I'm gonna have ideas here. I'm gonna have pitches or interpretations of a scene or a script that may not align with what the showrunner wants. And that's fine. You know, I won't like go into my shell and say, well, I'm not offering any more ideas because you don't like them. I know that there are things that I'm not aware of because I'm seeing episode 208 and you know that this is going to end in season 5 in a particular way. And that great idea I have doesn't complement what you're doing, you know? So understanding that reality and how to finesse the relationships that the relationship dynamics that come with that, you know, having the skill to deal with a variety of different types of personalities on a set, cast, crew, executives, and having the stamina and or work ethic and work structure to deal with the realities of television production, which is driven by how fast can you do everything, you know, to some degree. I would not have been prepared for that.
So then, even though the wait was long, and here you are, essentially helping other people's dreams at the school, nothing wrong with that, but maybe it had seasoned you in the right way.
Definitely seasoned me. You know, I'm definitely not campaigning for, you know, 17 years before like you get hired to direct. But I do think that there's, you know, there's are things to learn before you can really excel in particular professional environments. You know, if you didn't ask me this, but like if I had to identify it, I'd say around, based off of the experiences that I had, I'd say around 2008, I was probably ready to do TV. I learned enough about like people in politics, you know what I mean? And being a filmmaker and delivering for a client, I learned enough, I think, by that time that I wouldn't have been, you know, perfect, but I wouldn't have stunk up the place, and I would have been able to get in there and kind of figure it out and avoid big mistakes.
Well, you'd been through 9/11, and then the recession was around that time.
Yeah.
So it brought out probably interesting sides to people in stress like that. So once you've kind of weathered stuff like that, you think you were just like, okay, some pretty bad stuff has happened in the world, and I think I know where my footing is, you know, because if you're steering a ship, i.e. a set that
Right.
there's drama on, not enough time, somebody's mad or whatever,
Right.
you know, what's the worst that could happen? You know?
Right. Right.
So were there certain, and I don't mean to assume that I know what happened, I apologize, but were there certain things that happened that just got you ready for it, or it was just time of, you know, so that the arc?
I think it's just time, you know, like you do so many projects, and Murphy's Law, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, is gonna happen on every project. So then it's like, you have the thing you did and you're like, oh, that little thing I thought that was just gonna be a weekend, that was the project that I had a fire on set. You know, fires happen, okay. Or that was the project where I had, you know, a super egotistical person who wouldn't come out of their trailer for X amount of time. Okay, dealt with that. You know what I mean? Like, and I had to be the one to get him out. This was the one where they pulled out the money at the last minute, and I had, so you just kind of, you begin to get enough of a window into, you might as well just be open to the world exploding. You know, it's like, oh, pandemic, right? Okay, you know, like, and not minimizing it, but
Sure,
like
no.
you do like get to a point where you're like, I don't know what the day will bring, but I know that I'll be able to absorb it, you know, appreciate the moment, and try and find a way to get us home, you know, with some semblance of what we set out to accomplish today. And once you kind of get that, you can kind of, you know, go with the flow.
Whereas maybe being slightly younger and maybe different things, it would rattle you too much.
Oh, you'd be extremely rattled, and there'd be, you know, self-loathing and self-importance and why me, and it's like, that doesn't get the thing shot.
Sure. It's fun to wallow in, though.
It's fun. It is. I mean, that's what going home is for. You know, you go home and then you tell your partner, and like, can you believe what happened today? And they're like, I guess I'll have to hear this for 30 minutes. But you know, that's how it goes.
what was the point of no return for you? Not when you were inspired to be a director, but when you realized that you could actually make a living doing this.
So, well, I realized that being a feature filmmaker was not going to be a way to make a living. The moment that I said that's a wrap on my first feature, because it was the money was raised over the script was written and the money was raised over a 6-year period, and the amount of money I paid myself and the other producers, were all paid equally, was not even like I barely have to file taxes for the money. You know what I mean? Like it was very low, and so I'm like, all right, well, that was 6 years, that was $15,000 over 6 years. All right, well, that's not gonna, translate to moving out of my mother's house and whatever. So, while I had a full-time job at NYU, but that was, $35,000 a year. It wasn't much, living in New York, New Jersey. And so I said, well, what do I know how can I take this skill that I think I have and find a way to exploit it, for myself and make money off of it. And that was when I started building the production company to make videos. And, that was a journey of taking on more. It was a pivot moment, like we've kind of talked about. It's like, well, these budgets are small in their own way, but maybe if I wear more hats, then I can keep more of the money. Because the first couple projects that I did, it was like, well, the editor is making more than almost anyone because they're sitting here for the longest amount of time, like really on the clock, like 4 or 5 days of editing, while, I'm shooting for 1 day, producers producing, for however long, but they were becoming the ones who were making the most money. So I was like, well, if I edit, then I'll make more money. If I shoot it, then I'll make more money. If I produce it and maybe bring on an assistant, I'll make more money. And so I was constantly trying to figure out how to survive economically as a filmmaker. But that was, very shortly after I finished the first feature. Over time, as the company grew and was doing all right with those videos, I look at it and I say, well, how can I make more money? So I was like, we should be doing campaigns for people, because this one-off video thing I'm looking at my QuickBooks at the time and I'm like, well, all these budgets are in the same strike zone. I feel like the only way to get more money is to change the cachet of hiring us, which I don't think is going to happen without a big project, or we offer more services and charge more because of the volume of it. And, the irony of it is that decision to go toward campaigns led to some of the best performing years for us. And it was one campaign in particular where I was like, I'm going to take my fee and make a short film. Because by that time, it's 2014, I'm so far removed in my mind from something that I've directed for myself, because the feature film Premium, I directed in 2005. It had finished its kind of distribution trajectory by 2007. I directed a feature documentary in 2007, 2008. And so now I'm 6 years past when I could look at like a version of what I could do as a narrative director while having done thousands of videos for clients. And I was like, well, let me make something for me. And this short film that I made, was the thing that got picked up by HBO and got me into director programs and led to TV directing, and still is a sample that I use now. Like 6, 7 years later, because it was just, it's a pretty unique execution and concept. So, I always had my mind and my target on how to turn this into a career without it having to be reliant upon the models that everyone believes are the only options.
And so you were no longer working at NYU or just part-time?
I was working full time at the desk job until 2012. And honestly, that was the year of my 10-year anniversary at the job. And I was like, I'm not going to get, no disrespect to the job. It was great. But personally, I was like, I'm not going to get, y'all gave me a certificate for 10 years. You're not going to give me a watch for 25. Like, I'm not doing it. So I left that in the 10th year. I quit. But I was teaching at that time. And I was like, all right, well, the teaching is not as much of a guarantee, but it gives me more free time. And I think that I can use that free time to devote toward building the production company. Then I can teach to have that kind of smaller guaranteed income. And then, hopefully be able to push toward the other, my passion projects at the same time. So, I mean, I feel like what's interesting is I hear myself talk, or it may not be interesting, but it was all very methodical. It was like, I want to create, but then like, well, how do I get there? I'm not just going to sit here and like look at the stars and, daydream about how great it would be to like make this thing. It's like, what can I literally wake up and do tomorrow to move the needle toward, this goal?
So if you hadn't started that production company, then you may never have taken some of that money and put it into the short that ultimately
I wouldn't have had $30,000 to do it.
Right. Wow. When did TV become a major goal for you?
So I was kind of peeking around the corner looking at TV, starting around 07, 08. I mentioned in my book, one of my buddies, Seth Mann, was a director friend who had gone from indie films to television. And so I was like, okay, like he's a filmmaker to me, and he's going to TV, and I know him personally. He's a cool guy. So maybe there's something there. Maybe it's not the place where storytellers go to die. Because, in the past, people just, TV. And so I kind of always had my eye on him. And it's funny too, because there's like, I'm not a mystical kind of person, but I guess I'm spiritual. And I often can't help but remark on like the kismet of events sometimes. And I was walking down Melrose. I had parked on Melrose to go somewhere. And I was like, oh, there's like something shooting. And they had like all their equipment and like, blocking this place of business or whatever. And I was like, do I want to walk down Melrose or do I want to walk through the alley behind? Alley, Melrose. And I was like, alley. And so I walked down the alley, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the back of his head.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wait, is that you? I yelled his name, and he turned around. I was like, yo, that's crazy. I hadn't seen him in years. And just like I vacillated for like 10 seconds deciding which way I wanted to go. And
Right.
if I had chosen the street, I wouldn't have seen him. And if I had been a second later, I wouldn't have seen him.
Wow.
And then that time, this must have been 2012. And he was like, oh, well, you should apply for this HBO directing program. So I applied and I didn't get in, but like I got a little bit closer. I had to get a DGA, director recommendation. And I was able to kind of finagle that. And I was like, okay, I'm kind of getting closer, even though I'm still like on the outskirts. And so, I applied to every program that existed. And in 2015, after my short that I made, which was called BlackCard, premiered at this film festival in New York, that was part of HBO, the gentleman who runs the Sony program, Brett King, was at the screening and came up to me and was like, you should apply. And I was like, all right, well, you got it. And so, of course, it was like due for the next day, you know, with the letters of recommendation, notary public, and like an essay. And I was like, cool. I've been at the wire before. And I got into the Sony program in the fall of 2015. And that was when, you know, around that time, you know, I kind of talked a lot earlier about expectation. And I think, you know, the thing to kind of take away, at least as far as how I think about it, is like, I'll do a thing. I know that it can potentially do all of these things, like maybe help me get into TV, or maybe, you know, get me an agent or manager. But then I kind of, while I know they exist, and while I'll do my best to create it in a way that helps me achieve that, then I kind of, in my mind, back away from that, because I don't want that to be the only way to put value on what I do with it. And so this short film was very much that. It was like, all right, I'm gonna call my actor friends. If there's anyone I know that can, you know, maybe is more visible as an actor than somebody else, like maybe I'll see if they'll do me a favor. I'll put the money where it matters on screen, you know, and in a perfect world, it'll help me get into TV, but also I know that won't happen. I also know that's not a guarantee. I know it'll be a guarantee for me to make this short, look at it and say, okay, this is like where my talent lies when no one's telling me what to do and I'm making it for myself. And so that alone will be something that I'll really get value from, because then I can learn and pivot again. But it did the thing that I had hoped for, and it got me into these, it got me on the radar of people in the business of making TV. And so I did the Sony program, 2015. I did the HBO program, 2016. I did the Disney ABC program, 2016 to 2018. And I did the NBCU program in 2016. And through the relationships I was building, I was shadowing on shows, observing other directors, and, you know, making sure that I was building a network of folks who were aware of me and what my goal was, which was to direct single camera comedy.
And sorry, just a side note here. You mentioned your book. Can I just see your book for
Yes,
one
yes,
second?
yes.
Okay.
So this is the book. You know, this photo was actually taken on one of my return trips from LA back to New York after I'd moved out here. And a buddy of mine, Eric Van Selfton, took it before we got oysters, because that was our ritual.
It's a great photo.
Thank you. But yes, Transitions, A Director's Journey and Motivational Handbook. And it's, you know, for me, it's the book that I wish I could have read along the journey of the 17 years to getting paid for narrative directing. And I distinguish that because I made my own films. I did client work for people, but that was never someone saying, we want to hire you to direct this like narrative film or narrative TV show, and tell our story in this kind of way with your skill set. So, you know, it's a mixture of how-to, self-help, and inspiration. And I think it's useful for anybody in a creative field, but it's particularly tailored for directors.
You said you wish you'd had that book yourself when you were just starting out. Was there any tough love advice that you have in that book that you wish somebody had given you, that maybe it doesn't always sit well, but then you think about it and you're like, yeah, it applies?
You know, I don't know if if I have tough love in the book. You know, I think it's, I'd have to think about that, because I'm almost compelled to revisit my definition of tough love. But, you know, I feel like what I found I responded to in the books that I read was someone walking me through undeniable facts, right? So, and for instance, like in the book, I talk about going to the Robert McKee seminar, and people have a lot of opinions on it. But on the third day, he walks through, or at least when I took the course, scene by scene analysis of Casablanca, which is one of my favorite films. And so you walk through it, you break it down, and then for me, what that did was like, well, at the conclusion of this intricate breakdown of something where I'm nodding my head for 5 hours, like, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, that's great. That's smart. I can't go back to my script and where it doesn't have those things that I know work, I can't say it's good enough. You know what I mean? Like, I have to now work on my script and get it to the point where whatever I'm trying to do with this story matches the execution of those things in a Casablanca, you know? And I think in the book, the things that I talk about are like, you know, if we agree that these are the things, then how do we make sure that we, as artists and as business people, execute on those things? You know, so like, I even talk a lot about like the technique and the psychology of the job. Like, it doesn't matter if you make the best shot list in the world, if you can't navigate the personalities that come out of the trailer and out of the office and out of the van every day, then you're not gonna get 1/3 of that shot list, and nobody's gonna remember what you had planned, you know? So kind of just getting into the nitty gritty of that, and maybe opening the reader's eyes to those things more so than like, you know, maybe that's my version of tough love.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like some tough love.
Yeah, maybe
advice.
it is.
I like that though.
You know, it is. I think of like Whiplash and
Or Scared Straight.
Yeah, like I'm not like, you know, throwing cameras at people.
What are the 4 different levels of being a director?
Again, I'll preface, there's no higher level of importance per se. It's just like, and maybe it's not a totem pole. Maybe it's a, you know, it's a hieroglyphic wall that goes left to right. But I think you've got short films and web series. And in that space, you're doing things that are narrative, but they're going to take less time, at least on the production end. You could do a short film that takes a great deal of prep, but typically, just with the amount of money being spent and the nature of the content, I think you've got short film and web series. I think then you've got commercials and music videos and branded content, and those are maybe the distinguishing factor to consider, is that you're outright selling a product, right? Like you're selling this, you know, lotion, you're selling this, some of the stuff I did in my day was like this kind of sponsored documentary profiles where a brand might want to interview a bunch of people about what they do, but like that type of person is their direct customer. You know what I mean? So it's much more of a clear intent to sell. And then I think you've got television, which is obvious, and then you've got feature films, which are obvious, but the distinction being it's the medium for the director in features, and it's the medium for the writer in TV. And I think, you know, I would offer that trying all of them and being able to direct in all of them is a great skill set to develop, because you never know when one of them will be called upon. So as an example, I did the 5th episode of the final season of Silicon Valley. And so it's just like, it's this whole, it was inclusive of an opening, a Mad Max kind of opening with Russ Hanneman, and he's on a motorcycle, and these women in these kind of Mad Max cars are chasing him, and it's he's blowing them up like with this hand gesture or whatever. And so HBO being HBO was like, oh, let's go shoot the thing. So I was like, oh, we're gonna actually shoot that. So we took an extra day outside of our production window for the episode and shot that thing. But then there was also the character sold a tequila in the show called Tres Comas, which 3 commas for being a billionaire. And so HBO and an ad agency partnered up to actually sell that tequila. So the last part of that 5-hour window where I shot the Mad Max scene was getting like 18 different lines of him selling the vodka, which would be used for online commercials. And it was like, oh, I got y'all. They were like, how are we gonna do this? I was like, I got this. Here's how we'll shoot it. The motorcycle will pull up, he'll step off, I'll get each line in, I'll get half of them in this shot, we'll reset, I'll get half in that shot, it'll take us about 10 minutes. And it was like this thing I had done, it's kind of a running theme, that this thing I had done for all these years was like now a very great asset for what I was doing at that moment. And even like, a lot of the documentary stuff that I did, you'd have to walk into a room and say, okay, I'm thinking of, for my documentary on the Black Tankers, 761st, we secured an interview with General Colin Powell, and we had 15 minutes of his time. And like that was like 14 plus 1 to take a photo, right? And so got down to Virginia, and they're like, you can do it in this room. And this room was like the office furniture cemetery. So in 20 minutes, they were like, okay, get all that stuff out of here. Let's leave that chair. All right, we're gonna gel the windows. I think I saw a flag in the lobby. Let's go get the flag from the lobby. All right, there's a plant. And doing that like has helped me with production design when walking into a location that is a potential location for an episode, but I have to envision what it could look like, before I can, say I think this works or not. Like everything we walk into isn't what it will ultimately be. So I feel like I've left the farm and entered in another world here, but there are all these like takeaways from each of these kind of 4 types of directing that I think help you in your execution of each other one.
Sure. And then also too, managing stress and also having the confidence to say, I can do that, and I'm sure totally different world, being in Virginia, getting maybe security clearance to go somewhere and interview this man versus what seems like it would be a really fun set, Silicon Valley, but I'm sure there's a lot of moving pieces and just the pressure, but saying, yes, I can do that. It's really cool. Yeah. I mean, so many great directors started doing product,
Yeah, I think if you can tell a story in 30 seconds, and be aware of who your audience is, be aware of what the brand thinks of itself, because that's really the guiding, the North Star for how you need to choose your production design, your wardrobe, your frame composition, like all of those things. If you can do that in 30 seconds, that's one type of story, Then if you can take that and you actually understand, human beings and their emotions and their wants and needs and subtext, I think it just makes you very capable at doing this job.
How much time did you spend at each of those levels?
One thing I often say is I'm platform agnostic. So that's the flip side of like, that's the end game of delivery, right? Like, I don't care if it's TV, film, I guess Quibi came and went, but I thought that was cool. Web is great with me. Like if it's a story I'm interested in, where it ends up, fine with me. I have the same feeling for the, so-called levels that we're talking about too. Like I would make a short film next weekend if I had a script, because there's a different challenge of short filmmaking, which is it's about an event and something, well, you introduce a status quo, you introduce an event, and you then are left to imagine how the world, resolves itself after this event has impacted the protagonist's world or life. So I would do that next weekend in between directing an episode of television, I'm writing a script now, a feature script. I'm co-writing a heist script that I hope to make, as soon as I can finish it between directing these shows. And I still have a commercial agent. So I'm, they all kind of coexist to me. But in the years where the goal was to get to TV, I would say it was, feature filmmaker, it was like feature filmmaker and short filmmaker from 99 to '08, because I made my short that went to Sundance. I made another short that went to a bunch more festivals in '04. I made Premium and 761st in that time. So I'm kind of jockeying back and forth. And then from '08 to 2015, I made a couple web series. I made, I didn't do any short, I made another short film that brought me back to TV. And I was writing feature scripts all that time as well. And then now, let's say from 2015 to 2022, I've made a narrative podcast, that was going to be a short film, but with COVID, I couldn't personally absorb the COVID costs that would be put on the production in terms of testing and everything that would go with that. So I was like, well, let's do a narrative version of it, an audio podcast, and I'm very proud of it.
What's it called? Sorry.
It's called Wednesday Morning. And it's centered around, it was like a conversation around the 2020 election, but in a very surreal kind of discreet charm of the bourgeoisie scenario. And, I got to work with my wife, who's an actor, Kelly McCreary, Coleman Domingo, who's an actor, Spencer Garrett. So it was great to just, the thing that I learned from that project was it was kind of easier to get people for the narrative podcast, because no one worked for more than 2 hours, because it was like, all right, you're 12 to 2 in the studio and we'll get your character in this 50-page script and we'll knock it out. And so that had my mind clicking of like, I need to write another narrative podcast, because then that could maybe be something that becomes intellectual property and then can transition to a TV show like Homecoming. The Sam Esmail project. So anyhow, I feel like that for me, it's like wherever a story can live is the best place to put it. And live might be the different format. You might say, well, I can explore more of this world or this character in TV versus 2 hours with a film. Great. You might also be having to consider money. And so maybe the same idea and the themes of that are better served in a short film, because you have $5,000 and can make a short, which is better than an idea that you just talk about. So I think they're all just like, they're almost like lenses, like which lens is your favorite? Well, the one that gets the shot.
What is the classic Hollywood story or story structure that every filmmaker/writer should know?
I think plenty of people have said it better than me, the hero's journey, Christopher Vogler. I think understanding the archetypes of, well, first that classic 3-act structure, which is the setup, the confrontation, the resolution, and watching being introduced to a character and their world as they are experiencing it, having them deal with whatever inciting incident challenges them and makes them rise to action. And then obviously the resolution, where we see how the journey of Act Two has impacted them and will affect their life and the lives of those closest to them as they move past the world of our film. You know, I think that's something you have to understand because it's really where most storytelling exists, and then in turn how most people are used to absorbing and digesting a story. So learning what works before you break the rules is important. I think that there are other, you know, then you just get into, you know, more particular understandings of character and structure. That Hero's Journey book by Vogler is great because he breaks down, like, you know, the character archetypes from, you know, I might misquote some of these people, but like you've got allies, you've got the shapeshifters, you know, the people who are introduced as allies perhaps, but then they have ulterior motives, whether driven by plot or driven by character. Like all of these things are helpful to make you kind of look at the world of your story and begin to like pick up the right tool to craft it into something that best realizes whatever your themes and your points are that you're trying to accomplish. So I feel like that's really the key. Then if you are, I think that Robert McKee's book obviously has like a really great story triangle that was just one element of the book but it was very, I'm a visuals person. And so I think in his triangle, he has like, you know, at the top of the triangle is the classic Hollywood narrative that we're talking about now. At the bottom is the anti-hero, you know, like a Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver. And then at the bottom on the other side is the multiple character story, like a Magnolia or anything Robert Altman. And the joke that he makes is as you move down the triangle, your audience gets smaller, you know? And I think that's true, you know, unless you have a movie star in it and you can make Magnolia, you know?
Or Crash.
Or Crash, or, you know, whatever it might be.
Right.
But yeah, understanding those things I think is important to being able to have some agency and control over the story while still, you know, being responsive to what the characters tell you needs to happen.
Did you watch Casablanca again after you took McKee's class?
Oh yeah, I've watched it often. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you see it with new eyes once you took his class?
Definitely. I saw it with new eyes. You know, you start, there's like, I can enjoy something while watching, you know, the sausage being made. You know what I mean? Like, I can watch like, oh, I see what they're doing. I see why they did that in that scene. And that was still, you know, it was very economical. It was still character driven. And that was a smart way to do it in 1941. You know what I mean? Or even now, like we're watching Top Boy on Netflix. And there are just certain things that kind of have to happen in the story. And when they happen, I'm watching and I'm like, that was a very smart way to do something that has to happen. And so when you know the mile markers, that's when you can begin to, you know, add your own perspective, add your own sauce, you know, your own interpretation and make it unique. But you can't, if you don't know that mile marker is happening, you know, you can't do it at all. You know, a bad example would be like if you were a vegan, you have to know what certain elements are doing in a non-vegan dish to then say, we need this thing to accomplish what cheese would accomplish. You know what I mean? And so like the architecture of storytelling, you got to be fluent.
When you went to direct, was it some of the later episodes of You?
Of You, I did episode 307 and 308. So that was third season, episode 7 and 8 out of 10 total episodes.
So did you go and rewatch and really study who these characters are? Because they're very, very clear, interesting characters, fascinating.
Yeah, with any show, I'll go and, I mean, some shows make it impossible because they have too many seasons, but with You, I probably watched every episode twice because I'm watching for style. I'm watching for, and that could be from the writing to the tone, how they handle different moments, whether it's violence or sex or camera. Nowadays, how are you applying text, and being on a phone, because that's a whole other thing, and I'm just trying to digest. It's like the information's already there for me to start from, so I'm just trying to take it all in. A lot of times I might notice like, oh, well, you used to do this thing in season 1 and, it's not really happening anymore. Is that, like, why did you step away from that? And sometimes they're like, oh, that was a thing we hated. Or maybe they might say, oh, you know what, that was cool. I don't know why we aren't doing that anymore. Let's do that. So I'm trying to, like, information is key. And then, I'll read any and all scripts up to my episode because some things won't be finished. So, in a scenario like that, I could watch maybe 2 episodes, 301 and 302, and then I've got to read 3, 4, 5, and 6 to know where we are in the story, and then figure out what is happening in my episode. And then I've got to have questions about where it's going, so I'm aware if I'm setting up anything in particular for the final 2.
Sure. And a lot of chance meetings in a show like that, and a lot of characters lying and not revealing themselves, which is sort of, the audience is privy to it, but the other characters aren't.
Right. And that show, last little inside for the directors out there, that show was an interesting challenge that I didn't foresee, which is blocking for Joe, for Penn Badgley's character, where when we're in his mind and he's got his thoughts, blocking in a way where he can have business and be moving around a room, so those thoughts can kind of be private and he's not compelled to engage with the other person. So it's like if 2 people are looking at each other, it's a little weird to have this monologue this voiceover on him while he's really talking to somebody over here. But let's say I make him take a walk over here, get a plate out of the cupboard, his back's to her, he comes back here, puts the plate down, and a fork and a knife, and then he looks up. That could cover all the VO of his inner thoughts. And so it was a lot of like really having to think like the actor and come up with pitches that would work for that reason. And so I'm sure that'll be a skill that I'll take to something else that I can't predict.
We're hoping we can imagine 2 filmmakers. One is an artist, and she spends 5 years or so focusing only on the craft of filmmaking and nothing else. She learns story, camera, angles, lenses, blocking, and so on. So then we have the other filmmaker, and this filmmaker spends the same 5 years, but only on the business. And she studies the market, financing, distribution, budgets, networking, etc. Which of these 2 filmmakers do you think will have a longer lasting career?
I would say that the person spending, if these 2 people are one and the same, right? Like it's Pete and Bizarro Pete, right? And you've got, I think the version of this person that is focused on understanding the craft and and I'm going to add an element of a constant of they're both making things. I would say that the person studying the craft is going to have a longer career because they are likely at some point to make something impactful. They'll be able to take what's in their heart and put it on videotape. I'm going to say on film, but on tape or in a final product that best represents what they felt when they started the project. Because that's really the divide, right? The divide is, I have this feeling, I want to make this thing, and for a while, the execution doesn't match the authenticity of the feeling. And then you get to a point where you've built up enough skills to get pretty close to how you felt and how you deliver it for the audience to feel that way too. The person who is making things, but maybe leaning more into the studying of the business and all of that, I feel like the real asset in the industry is in voice, and is in perspective. And so I feel like they may learn what they're supposed to do, or, here's how you do it, or, but I think if it's in broad strokes and in not like spending the additional time that the other person is and really mastering the craft, I think this person wins.
Okay. What if this person becomes so, that their voice is so unique and they just make this incredible film, but they're naive to the business?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that could take them out in some sense?
I mean, it could take them out. I mean, in the perfect world, they meet a really honest agent and manager and lawyer who is really interested in nurturing their talent and, cares about their, or tailors their representation to the individual, but the likelihood of having to rely on that, I think, is a gamble I wouldn't take, so like, and all not, it seems like the right thing to do, but that's kind of, I feel like my book is actually for the person you're talking about, like my book is for the person who is spending all their time trying to be creative, make XYZ work, know how to pick the right lens and tell the story in the right way, but I'm kind of in their ear saying, that's not enough though. Don't forget about this. Have you read the trades? And I think it's the superhero of this is like, is the marriage of the two people that you're presenting. How can you take, and that's not 50-50. Sometimes it's 70-30 because it's 70 business, 30 creative, because now I'm in development and I got to talk to people and I've got to like have meetings. And then now I'm making this thing and it's 80-20, now I'm the creative director and I've got other people around me taking care of the, people management and business of it. And I need to be in that space. Like it's I guess the real revelation of your question is the fact that, you have to kind of be all these things, in my mind, if you want to have the best opportunity at preserving your intent. And it's no different, than even like in indie films. Now they talk about this producer of marketing and distribution, like who's working on, social media things well before you've even gotten the money, because it's going to be a value add down the line. And I remember I talked to one person on a doc I was working on. He said that, people complain about the middleman or the middle person, right? And, there are these gatekeepers and, we can't do this, we can't do that. But the reality of it is with the democratization of all things now, you could argue that the middle person, the gatekeeper, is you. And you have to change your connection to what you're willing to do. Because theoretically, you could take your iPhone and shoot it. You could take your computer and get some software and edit it. You could release it on your website that you designed. You could market it through your social media campaigns, which you manage. Like, there's no one stopping you anymore. And so there's no better time than now to marry those two profiles together. And I think if you look at the filmmakers and the storytellers who are really doing well in today's world, that's exactly what they've done.
In your book, do you have a chapter about sort of people that don't want to focus on the business?
I don't have a chapter dedicated to that, but I do speak specifically to representation, securing it, and what you should look for in that team. Because to your point, at the end of the day, or not at the start of the day too, your reps get paid when you work. So they work for you. They don't actually send you a check from anywhere connected to, their job. They're sending you the check from the people who paid you to do the show that you did. And so really being thoughtful, it's a partnership, it's a marriage. Like you have to marry the right people, and you have to be clear about what you want. You have to be, I think it works best when you're aware of how the business works, because then they recognize that you are also, perhaps more of a partner than some of their other clients in your own career. And, at the end of the day, like you have got to take the reins on the business of you.
How is it possible that you read a screenplay, 50 times before you shoot it?
Yeah. So when I get my perspective on directing is I'm trying to be the authority on the material. And most of the things that I do that are, in the feature or short space, I've written, or I've been a part of that process from the beginning. I've given notes from the beginning. I'm aware of all of the kind of mental gymnastics that are behind those, 10 pages or those 120 pages. And so when I get a script for TV, because I haven't been privy or had the privilege of seeing that process, I'm trying to get a very thorough understanding of what's on the page so I can begin to deconstruct what I think that process may have been. So that means I'm reading the script as many times as I can in as many different environments as I can. I'm reading the script as different crew people. This is just my personal take. I like to read it as the cinematographer. I like to read it as the wardrobe costume designer. I like to read it as the production designer, because then, and I read it as a director last, because I feel like all of those things help me get into the mind of A, the people I'm collaborating with, but like B, I get an understanding of what I have at my disposal as the director. So I could read a scene, and on the third reading, maybe I'm like, oh, you know what? Now I'm thinking about it as the actor, because I've done all the other thinking, and I'm like, oh, what if the actor wants to sit down in this scene? Well, I'd love for them to have a chaise lounge versus like a chair, So now, that third reading revealed a furniture selection, you know what I mean? Or if I'm reading at home versus reading at a cafe when the world was open like that, sometimes just being around a bunch of people changes what I'm digesting. So it's important for me to do that. I also make a spreadsheet where I take all the storylines, and this comes from another book on directing. I'll take all the storylines and put them in a different column so I can have a top-down look at the architecture of the entire episode. And then it also doubles as a brief refresher for me on set, should I need it? Or if an actor's like, well, where was I in the last scene? And I'll be like, oh, well, we're doing scene 40 now, but in scene 22, you did X, Y, Z. And then they can be like, okay, great. I know where I'm coming from. So being as thorough as possible is the goal.
Interesting. So you would digest a script differently in, let's say, a busy coffee shop here in LA than you would, let's say, in a library.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of hard to explain with any value that's not like, it just feels different. But like, you might be paying more attention in one of those, settings than you had in another, or maybe you heard something in the background that triggered a subconscious thought about something you're experiencing here. I don't know. Yeah, I can't put like a thumb on it or point to what it is exactly, but I do think I know for sure. Like it's been on subsequent readings where something is revealed, and so I'm trying to really give myself as many opportunities to find those revelations before I'm on set.
And as the director last, you wear the director's hat reading it last? That's interesting.
Because I feel like I can only direct something that's been figured out. Like otherwise, like I'm putting camera in random places that are not driven by actor or like some other level of like thematic thought that is tethered to story, because I mean I could very easily be like, oh yeah, I'll put the camera here, I'll do that we'll swoop around, but then like as you read it, you're like, I'm gonna treat that storyline like this actually, and I have to settle into it a little bit more.
Do you ask the screenwriter for story A, B story, C story, or how many storylines are in the episode?
When I get the script, I extract them myself. I try and identify them as, the A story is, this character is having a crisis of confidence about something at home. And then the B story is this thing at work. And then the C story is one of the kids is going through X, Y, Z. And then the D story, and I'm sure sometimes I'm probably maybe adding a storyline, because I might really carve them out to be distinctive, but maybe in their mind, something is a similar storyline, But I just go in and carve it out. And when I have time, I'll try and give each scene a name. Now, I have less and less of that time now, but I try and give each scene a name. So I'm like, as I step into directing it, it's like, this is, so-and-so's retribution or, whatever it might be. So I can kind of have a guiding principle for how I'm talking about the scene to the actors or the crew, how I want to shoot it, and just have something that's helping me have a point of view. Because at the end of the day, I think I'm there to apply a point of view from which to shoot and direct the scene.
Right, because we were talking about inventing Anna before when we were setting up, and so I guess you could say, well, we're learning about this journalist, and she's there, and she doesn't want to do another Me Too story. She wants to do something else, and she's at war with her editor, and she's just fascinated by this story of this woman, and she's having a crisis at home. I guess I don't know if she's going to have a baby or she's trying to or something, and she's not even sure she wants to.
Right.
And then she just becomes obsessed with this woman, almost as a way to avoid her own life, really, in a lot of ways. So yeah, those are basically the three stories, and I'm sure there's other parts to it. But yeah, you had me thinking of that just because.
Yeah, and in different episodes, there were probably other characters where it was like, and this is the D story, and this is the E, because some other supporting character was important to, because it's always this point counterpoint to whatever the theme is. It's like, here is, you know, this idea represented at its best via this character, and here's this idea represented at its, you know, perhaps worst through this character. And the cocktail of the entire episode hopefully says, and here's what we think about that.
Right, and maybe that's when she meets the other people that knew Anna.
Mm-hmm.
Right, okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
Right.
now I see what you're talking about. How do you figure out how many storylines are in an episode?
Yeah, I mean, it's just carving them out like functionally, like as I read the script, and this is probably into, you know, second or third reading. Like the first one is I try and let that be uninterrupted and purely as a reader. So I can kind of just say, oh, okay, here's the story, you know, that is being told. I don't want to start saying like, oh, that's funny, oh, that's witty, or, you know, making notes on, oh, I think that's a high angle shot. Like I just want to read it uninterrupted. But second or third episode, I'll go through, and when making that spreadsheet, you know, first scene is usually what the episode's about, right? So, okay, boom, I'll take that. Second scene, I'll just go scene by scene until as a new storyline is introduced, I'll give it a new heading. More often than not, I don't think you're going to get out of Act 1 without having been introduced to all of them, you know. And so, and in television, in some of the shows will literally tell you this is the cold open, this is Act 1, end of Act 1. Others may do dip to black, you know, which is basically the same thing. And so, you know, like in that Act 1, or, you know, in that first area of scenes before it dips to black, that's probably going to be all of the storylines that are at play, because it moves so quickly that you're not likely to have a new storyline introduced in Act 2.
So you have an Excel document already sort of like plugged in, and then you just, for each new project, you just plug in. Okay, interesting. Yeah. And so you do that fairly soon after you've read the script a few times?
Mm-hmm. I'll do that fairly soon. You know, like I mentioned, it's useful for being on set, but it's also useful in prep, because in prep, I'm in the van, or I'm self-driving, and we're going to all these different locations. And now, instead of having to thumb through the script, I can go to my spreadsheet and say, oh, yeah, okay, this is that scene. And then on a location scout, I can glance really quickly, remind myself of why we're here, you know, and what we need, and then move through the process pretty efficiently.
Okay. And this is going to be different than a shot list?
Yes.
Much different? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you do anything that's more tangible that's not on the iPad or your laptop?
No, you know, the driver, before COVID, I used to have a script, and I would have the shot list that I would print out from Hollywood Shot Designer. And that would be a function of getting the floor plans from, you know, that I can show you. That would be a function of getting the floor plans from, resume editing. Yeah, that would be a function of getting the floor plans from the production designer, and then implementing them into Hollywood Shot Designer, and then blocking it. So as an example, this is a floor plan from a club location in West Adams for a scene from Insecure.
Oh, nice.
And this was 3 characters walking up to a club, 2 characters walking up to a club. Issa and Daniel, she's blue, he's red. They find a bouncer at the door. Bouncer 1 and bouncer 2 are our gray folks. And then we had another character, I didn't put the name here, but that she knew from high school who walks up and helps get them into the club. And so, I've got, I don't necessarily put everything in here, but I at least have the broad strokes. I had this wide from across the street that tracked with them as they walked past the line of people, thinking that they would walk up and get in. Of course they don't, and they're met with security. I think this wide from, it says wide from across, symmetrical, tighter for crowd exit. That was something that I got at the end of the night. It was for the end of the sequence, but I got it. You shoot all the exteriors at one time. And then I knew I would bring them back on this steady cam shot in the green, land and then over the bouncer back to them. And then I would have, coverage and then coverage going both ways. And so in the pre-COVID days, I would have these all printed out, and I would have my script printed out, and I would just kind of walk around with all of these. I'd share those with the AD and with the DP. And obviously things change. Some scenes go exactly as planned, but it's mostly to have a plan and to be able to have the crew prep toward an idea. Because even if the coverage all changes, this is where the actors are going to be. But with COVID in the beginning, there was a commitment to being paperless, to not handing, like when people were washing their mail, it was, no productions were handing out scripts. So everything became electronic. And so another app that I use, Scriptation, became my go-to. And so it's great because the script's in there. Now I don't have to have a script. I can update new drafts with my notes from a prior script. And instead of having that app I showed you, Hollywood Shot Designer, I would just add a page into the script, take a screenshot of the plan and just draw on it in the script. So then everything just became one document.
And sorry, that's called Shot Lister?
That's called Hollywood Shot Designer.
Shot Designer, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of just plug in the exact sort of you said Issa Rae was red, her character.
Right.
And then the other character was blue, and then gray were the friends and stuff. So you can assign the sort of the
there's a bunch
variables.
of icons for characters. They have lights, they have different props, they have cars and motorcycles and kind of all the basic things that will pop up, and you can just say boop, 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 And if you want, you can animate the cameras, but at a certain point, I feel like it becomes a little too much because you have to leave room to figure it out on the day. But it's a great device for prep so people can have an idea of where the production should be leaning.
And so everybody gets a copy of that?
Well, in this case, the DP and the AD, because they're filtering it out to, the camera department. And then the AD is, it's helpful for the AD to be able to manage how much time will be needed for a particular scene.
But actors and background talent, they're not going to do that?
No, they're not going to know. I mean, I might show it to them if they wanted to,
Sure.
But overwhelmingly, it comes down to the communication, which is the tough part of the job. Being able to relay what you want, being able to do it in a way where you're not a dictator, and you in my mind, I've got this whole scene figured out because I can't show up without having done that. Now, it doesn't mean I'm right, but I've got it all figured out. And I've got to allow the actors and the cinematographer, everybody to have their time to find it and also feel collaborative in it. And so it's like developing the methods to do that. That's the journey, I think, of the director.
How much of directing at the highest levels in this business is about skills you have at your craft versus people skills and politics?
So I had a meeting for a show or for a network rather last week, and we got into a conversation about soft skills, right? which are what we were kind of talking about earlier. Like, you can have the best shot list in the world, but the soft skills help you get somebody out the trailer, help you convince somebody that the work they're doing is great, help you, deal with whatever scenario that might arise, right? I think that a director without humanity is going to have challenges doing their job. Because, I think back to being younger and you're just so focused on, got to get the shot. Like, why, if everybody would just come here and do what I'm ready to do, we could get, you know what I mean? Like you're just, it's all about getting this thing done. You're feeling the burdens and the pressure of the money, because you're probably over leveraged and you're tired, and why won't they just do what I want them to do? And, that is also natural when you don't have the tools to, deal with the pressures of the job. But I think as you learn them, you do recognize that those soft skills are key. And look, I've done episodes as a guest director where I've been brought to a show to direct an episode. And that is, at that point, they think that you can do it. They think you're competent and you won't mess up their show, right? Then there comes a point where, like, now I'm a producing director on a show and a co-executive producer. Now they're saying, well, we think you're someone that can help work with all the directors we'll hire, can help, be a liaison between post and the producers for the creative. Now that's a different person in terms of skills, right? Then there's the, pilot director, like I have a pilot I'm attached to. That's a different thing because they're looking for someone who can do both of those things while also, maybe have a little more ownership of it as a director than a guest director because you're creating a look for a show. So you're marrying like so many different parts of what you do. And knowing when and why to apply pressure, I think is the director's, challenge.
Can you tell us about how to politic and what is that?
Mm-hmm. I think, how to politic, I think is that same kind of answer, like knowing when to apply pressure. Some things, when I was working as faculty, I used to be in a lot of meetings, and I would just I had a joke where it's like, people can talk about whatever they want until it sounds like there's about to be a policy change that's going to affect the job I do. I can sit here and be unmoved because I don't know why that person may be performing what they're doing right now. Maybe they're making a stance for some reason I have no idea about. And this person has tension with them, and that person always says something, and this person doesn't want to, reveal what they don't, all these things. But the moment it sounds like there's about to be a new pile of work on my desk, well, now I have a thought, And so I just kind of learned, like, read the room and see what's really happening and whether or not something impactful is happening, something performative is happening, and whether or not what you might be getting ready to say matters or is going to have an impact. And I think that was one of the best things that, again, I didn't know I was learning, but I think that was one of the best things I learned being in like a university environment. And so I try and, maintain vigilance in reading a room and seeing what's happening and whether or not, you know, and measuring my response to get what I'm looking to get. And that's not, you know, I'll flip this and say, that's not to say that everything is a manipulation and everything, but, you know, I can remember one time being called into a trailer, hair and makeup trailer, with like, you know, showrunners, star actor, actress, and like hair and makeup. And I'm being asked all these questions and I'm like, what's happening? And it was about a scene that we had agreed to shoot a certain way. And then I'm listening and listening and listening. And I'm like, oh, what I'm recognizing here, because I'm not like being super responsive to like the fact, like, first off, we've already talked about this. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry, talk. Because I know the more you talk, the more I'm going to get something that I can begin to understand. And, you know, I don't know if it was 3 minutes or 10, it felt like 30, but I was like, oh, it sounds like to me, and my guess here, that this actress wants the body double, but doesn't want to ask for it. And I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And I said, you know, well, why don't we just do the body double, blah, blah, blah. Because there were all these things connected, it seemed to her, for that request. You know what I mean? And like, I noticed that our relationship kind of got that much better after that. And I was just reading the room and trying to be, like, I could say we've talked about it 3 times, but like, does that matter? You know? So I think it's allowing people to be people, you know what I mean? And trying to be aware of like the multiple ways you can get to an end result that maintains the integrity of what you set out to do.
So there's not just subtext on the page, there's some on set too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What if we think we have soft skills, but we really don't? How does the production show us that? How do other people show us that we actually don't have the soft skills we thought we had?
Well, that makes me reach for the book.
Oh,
actually.
good. Okay.
Because in the book, in the introduction, you know, because as with anything, you write something, and for me, I want to go like, well, what will make you listen to this, right? And so in the introduction, here we go. There are 3 questions that I'll actually read you because it's not a long thing. In 2014, after 6 unsuccessful years of unrealized efforts to break into episodic television directing, I asked myself a series of probing existential questions. And I think these 3 questions answer the question about like, what if you think you've got soft skills, but you know, things aren't happening. I asked, what's not working? What if everything I'm doing is wrong? And how can I pivot? So if you think that you've got those skills, but you ask yourself what's not working, and you look and you say, well, my films do well, but like, this isn't happening. Maybe it's that. Maybe I don't know the industry and the mechanics of the business well enough. You know, maybe I keep making films that if I had read the trades, I could have seen that there were already 2 films in development about that thing, and mine was never going to compete. You know, I think those kind of questions that demand self-reflection help you avoid getting mired into something that you think is what it's not.
Can we learn soft skills? Can we learn how to, I mean, we all think we know how to work with other people, but sometimes life shows us that that's not the case.
I think we can learn them. I had to learn them. Yeah, I think I had some handful of them, you know, but to your earlier question, like if I would have been offered TV coming out of Sundance, it would have been different, you know? And so I think, and over the next, you know, years, and even, you know, I learned a new soft skill last week, I'm sure, you know? I think the thing, it's not the ability to learn, it's the appetite to learn, right? Because we can keep learning until the day we die, you know, but if we think that we've got it all figured out, then it's off the table.
Once you establish yourself as a working television director, do you interview for your next job?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you do a lot of, you know, so it's a lot of general meetings before you ever get hired, which is basically will I get along with you? Are you crazy meeting? You know what I mean? Like, and you do a lot of generals, so more and more people can say, oh, yeah, competent person, nice enough person, like, you get what we're doing over here at our company? Maybe, you know? And somewhere along the line, someone's gonna say, okay, we're gonna hire you, like Kenya Barris did for me in 2017. And so then you begin to build your resume. Hopefully you get invited back to a show, because that's kind of, so if the general meeting went well and people were like, okay, talented, not crazy, you get what we're doing over here, getting invited back is the affirmation of that. Oh, they must not have been crazy. They must have really done a nice job, and they must have really understood what the show wanted. The kind of industry, not wisdom, but saying or whatever, thought is that when you see someone with a bunch of one episode at a bunch of different places, it's like, well, why aren't you ever going back, right? And so you get invited back, then you do more and more shows. The beauty of today that might mask the invited back is that a lot of shows are doing block episodes where, like I did 2 at one time. So it might look like you got invited back. But once you do enough work, the work itself begins to be what vets you. So someone may say, oh, we're thinking about, or even for like the shows that I'm on where we are looking for directors, you'll say, oh, they've done X, Y, Z, blah, blah. And you can just look and tell that have the skill set to do your show. Then you'll probably call around and see if there are people that you think, people that know that person that can, give you a little bit more insight into them. So that's where the reputation and that community is really important. And then after that, you always have some kind of Zoom, which is maybe less of a meeting. Like they'll get to know you, and you'll probably speak really specifically to the show. So it's not a general, it's like about this show. And at that point, I feel like it's probably your job to lose. So I guess the long answer to your question is, at this point, I'll either get an offer or I'll get like an outright offer. They want you to do this block of episodes because they've done enough vetting that they feel like they don't need to speak directly to me, or they already know me, or they want to have a meeting on Zoom. And if it's at that point, they're probably highly considering me for the job, and that's the final step.
What are a few do's and don'ts for a general? Maybe don't speak too much. You might say the wrong thing, or
I think meetings are, you got to find a way to still be yourself in an unnatural environment, because it's kind of like speed dating, you know what I mean? And so I feel like the do's are to be very clear on, have a very clear and concise way to deliver your backstory and who you are, your bio, your origin story, to be very clear on why you want to do the show. Hopefully who you are and what you've done connects to the show. So then it becomes to make almost perfect sense why you should be directing it, Don't come in there and be unaware of the person you're talking to. There are so many opportunities to find a connective thread that Google will help you with. whether it's, oh, you went to NYU, or, oh, you're from New Jersey, or you worked with the person I know, on so-and-so project, and they say hi, like any little thing that, that's not going to get you the job, but it begins to warm things up a little bit. And I think be clear about, what you offer to the show, and ask questions. I think to come in and not have any questions belies a person who's not very curious, because with those questions you gain information. Not that I'm the model for it, but like I'm thinking like you asked me a question about this person versus that person, and I'm like, well, what is that person's goal? Because that's going to help me kind of answer the question. And sometimes in a meeting, asking questions helps you figure out what you might not want to say.
And just absolute don'ts.
Well, yeah, it's the don't come in there unprepared, whether that's in understanding the person in front of you, in understanding their bio or some portion of it that you can, because sometimes I've come across a few people where it's like, you scrubbed yourself from the internet somehow, and I don't know how you did that, but I don't know anything about you. So their personal bio, their bio here at this job, what do they have the power to do, right? Are they the person who hires, or are they the person who weeds out? And then, this is the meeting that gets you to the next person who may actually be able to hire. Like, what projects are they proud of? Has anything been greenlit recently? Or, did a show just premiere last week? Watch that show and be able to talk about it, because that shows that you're invested in what they do as well. Because at the end of the day, I think the way I try and view working professionally in a world full of collaborative, creative people is I want as many people to make their projects as possible. I'm here to be a support for that, whether maybe it's feedback, or maybe it's directing an episode, or, maybe it's a go get 'em champ, but providing that type of energy, I think, is something that folks are happy to have around them.
And lastly, how early is too early?
For what?
To show up at one of these meetings?
Oh, how early is too early to arrive? I mean, make sure you're there on time. I try and get there 30 minutes early, but then you won't see me in the lobby until, 5 minutes before. You know
Sure,
what I mean?
okay.
Maybe 10. 10's a good amount of time, because you do want to give yourself time to get in, sit down, run through whatever you might have prepared again. Sometimes it might be going into the bathroom and stretching out a little bit, or whatever you need to do. But don't walk in there at 1:28 for 1:30, because unless you've got some abilities that I don't have to smoothly transition to meeting mode.
You don't go in expecting to be hired. Instead, you go in to make it impossible for them not to hire you? Mm-hmm. Okay. How is that different?
So, the way I view it is, and this is like, I think a big takeaway from the book is that I'm big on viewing things through the prism that I can control, right? And viewing things in a way that, really prevents getting beaten down by the realities of what we do in a world where you're selected or not selected for reasons known and unknown, fickle and arbitrary, and sometimes spot on. And so my thought was, when I was trying to get jobs, and I still carry it with me, is that I understand that there are people who will be easier to hire for a particular job. And that happens now, But my job is to come into this meeting and make it the most challenging decision for them to not hire me. So what does that mean? I'm going to come in and tell my bio origin story, and it's going to be, concise. It's going to be, whatever, funny. I'm going to give you the best me that's honest, but designed to, connect with what we're talking about here as a project as possible. I'm going to show you that I've done my research. I'm going to speak about the show because I've watched enough to develop a point of view that's informed. I'm going to be interested in asking questions about it. I'm going to let you know outright how much I want to do this show. All the things that make it where you're like looking at the grid of people up for it. You may have somebody that's done more work than I have in this particular genre or just at all, but maybe they weren't as exciting a meeting. Maybe they didn't outright tell you they want the job. Maybe they didn't, get into a really deep dive conversation into the show, and I understand why you would still hire them over me if, for all the reasons that make hiring what hiring is, but I want that to be a tough decision. And my thought was if I can build a Rolodex, a database, a spreadsheet full of meetings where that was the end result, at some point, somebody's gonna be like, all right, this is the right one for him.
I see. So then it's kind of nebulous, this like, I'm going there to get hired versus I'm going to make sure that they can't not hire me. Because that seems like it checks more boxes. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's clearer to me.
And it's the actor's audition, right? Like the actor's audition is, you can't audition to get the job. Like that, if you do that, you're going to be depressed because how many jobs are you going to get? You have no control over that, but what you can do, and this is from me on the other side of the table, like watching auditions, like the auditions that land are, I can tell that you had a perspective, you made a choice, you prepared and you executed on that choice. And whatever those three things were, you provided a tape that was your best presentation of those things. And then ain't nothing else you can do about it. You know what I mean? Like we can debate, we might say, well, she's, the person that we've already cast for her sister, she doesn't look anything like her and it's a big stretch because that's important. And so no, we don't hire that person. And they may have been the best person, but there's another reason why they might not have gotten the job. And so, directors are auditioning in somewhat of a similar way. And just taking the reins and making sure like you show them what you can do, show them who you are and let them decide, but make it hard.
And how do you say, I would love to take on this opportunity? Or is that what you say?
That's what I would say. Outright.
So maybe other people might think that, but that's too passive and they just go, okay, great. So yeah, just please keep me in mind. Like you basically let it be known.
Let it be known.
I want this.
Because there's, and my estimation is that on this fictitious sheet of paper of names that are up for something, maybe one or two of them are doing it because their agent said they should. All right. And maybe it's attractive to the people behind the show because, it's so-and-so, or maybe they, used to be so-and-so, like, cool. But like, I'm going to come in and there will be no doubt, and in a world of meetings where folks are having 40 meetings a week, like these things begin to stand out.
And lastly, do you send a follow-up email or even a card?
Well, it depends. Sometimes there are a lot of relationships where I don't have any of these folks' information because the reps set the meeting.
Gotcha.
And then you go, and that's kind of how the reps remain where they remain, as the conduit. And then sometimes I'll have folks who will yeah, folks who will like be like, oh, here's my card. And then that kind of lets you know, A, the meeting went well, but also they have a maybe different kind of relationship they're trying to build.